Security Advisor Mike Waltz was grilled by reporters yesterday about President Trump's comments on the war in Ukraine, and he dodged the questions. Take a look.
The president has called Zelensky a dictator. Does he view Putin as a dictator? And does he want Zelensky out of power? I know he's called for elections.
Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly.
While Waltz might not have had an answer to the simple question as to whether Trump views Putin as a dictator, the New York Post sure does, publishing this front page headline today. The Murdoch-owned newspaper simply says, President Trump, this is a dictator, with a picture of Putin. This comes as the president's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia met with Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel brings us the latest.
President Zelensky is changing his tune, suggesting overnight he's now open to discussing a deal. President Trump is demanding for Ukraine to hand over 50% of its mineral rights in exchange for continued American support. After meeting with Trump's envoy, retired General Keith Kellogg, President Zelensky gave his nightly address, saying economy and security must always go hand in hand, and the details of the agreements matter. Zelensky also laid out what he expects in return, calling for a reliable and clear system of security guarantees that ensure long-term protection from Russia. American and Ukrainian officials tell NBC News the Trump administration presented Zelensky with the proposed mineral deal last week, giving him an hour to sign it. Zelensky refused, saying it didn't make security guarantees explicit. He was told Trump would be angry. And President Trump did respond angrily, falsely accusing Zelensky of being a dictator, and now making it clear he wants that deal signed.
Can you resurrect that deal? Is there anything that you can do?
I think I'm going to resurrect it. Or, we'll see what happens, but I'm going to resurrect it, or things are not going to make him too happy.
In Ukraine this morning, at a rehabilitation center for soldiers just back from the front lines, some say they feel like they're being squeezed by the United States. But Sergeant Volodymyr Chaika doesn't oppose the deal in principle after what he's seen in combat over the last 3 years.
Some critics have said that President Trump is exploiting Ukraine, is taking advantage of its position right now in order to extract resources. You, as someone who's fought for this country so much, what do you think about that?
Between two evils, you have to pick the better one, he says. If I have to choose between the United States and the possibility that Russia will take over our country, I pick the United States.
And just moments ago, following his meeting with President Zelensky, that special envoy, Keith Kellogg, striking a rather different tone than President Trump when it comes to how they describe the Ukrainian leader. Kellogg just posted this on social media: a long and intense day with the senior leadership of Ukraine. Extensive and positive discussions with Zelensky, the embattled and courageous leader of a nation at war, and his talented national security team. So, Joe, I mean, that's Keith Kellogg doing a 180 from what we've heard from Trump, calling him Zelensky a dictator. But I think it's telling Kellogg not part of those initial talks with Russia. He's someone who is widely disliked in Moscow. So this, again, harkens back to our conversation of a few hours ago. Sometimes the Trump administration in the first term did things very differently than the president himself. It was much harder on Russia. We might be seeing a similar dynamic here, or does Trump just simply run roughshod? Only time will tell.
Well, like we said a couple of hours ago, look at the people who are around Donald Trump. And General Kellogg has a great reputation as somebody that will stand and fight for freedom. And that freedom, of course, means pushing back against Russian aggression and trying to get a deal that ultimately protects Ukraine. As we said, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he is a cold warrior, and he earns his stripes from his family fleeing communist Cuba. Same thing, of course, we had Mike Waltz on earlier. Mike Waltz has been a cold warrior as well, tough both on Russia and also tough on China. And so, Peter Baker, going back to the first term, we always talk about, and not just because Jonathan's right here with us, but we always talk about that question John asked in Helsinki, and Donald Trump saying that he trusted Vladimir Putin more than his own intel agency. At the same time, things like that were going on that would shock the conscience of anybody that knows anything about foreign policy. Donald Trump's Vice President Mike Pence would be in Europe, and he would be delivering a speech against Russia that Ronald Reagan could have delivered. And so it is interesting, and we always talk about what happened with the Republicans in Donald Trump's first term, passing some of the toughest sanctions on Russia yet. So, again, the New York Post, exactly right. We are dealing with a dictator in Russia. It is going to be interesting to see if Donald Trump's second term regarding Russia plays out like his first term did.
Yeah, I mean, look, is Keith Kellogg playing the good cop to Trump's bad cop in a deliberate way, or is there, is he off the reservation? And he's not been, I mean, even though he's supposedly the special envoy for Ukraine, he's not been the person at the table in Saudi Arabia with the Russians when Marco Rubio sat down. So a lot of people assume he's been sidelined or marginalized. And so when he says what he said in that post today, is that him sort of pushing back a little bit, or is that him, helping, in his view, helping Trump try to mitigate the damage that he's caused by going after Zelensky? Because look, what this has done, this has been good for Zelensky domestically in terms of his own political standing. This has helped consolidate support behind Zelensky again against Trump, because a lot of Ukrainians, even who might not be happy with Zelensky right now, certainly don't like the way Trump has characterized him or characterized their role, their responsibility for the war, as if somehow they invaded themselves.